The apocalypse isn't coming, it is here. Climate scientists say we're running out of time. Ecosystems collapsing, wars with no end in sight, economic systems failing millions. 3 million people in one country alone experiencing war related trauma. Young people choosing not to have children because the future feels too broken. So answer me this, why are we watching apocalypse movies? Avatar, Fire and Ash crossed $1 billion. A film about a dying world, families fleeing, ecosystems on fire. One battle after another, Paul Thomas Anderson's film about America's collapse is being called the best film of 2025, and not to mention nominated for many Academy Awards. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, a story about a creator abandoning his creation to suffer. 98 million views on Netflix and counting. You'd think we want escapism, superheroes, rom-coms, anything but more collapse. But we don't. We're watching the apocalypse. And today, I want to tell you why. Because the answer isn't what you think, and understanding why might be the most important thing you'll learn today. Welcome to The Silver Frame, where stories expose the human mind. I'm your host, Miguel Velasquez, and each episode, we explore the psychology behind the films we love. Not to analyze movies, but to understand ourselves through them. Let me start by saying something out loud. If you feel exhausted right now, you are not alone. I get it. If it feels like it's one crisis after another with no break, you're not imagining it. In 2024, loneliness was formally recognized as a public health crisis. By 2026, researchers are calling what we're experiencing collective trauma. Not just individual trauma, collective, meaning everyone is affected. There's a term psychologists use, vicarious trauma. It means experiencing trauma by witnessing other people's suffering. You don't have to be in a war zone to experience war trauma. You just have to watch it every day on your phone. A 2024 study published in the British Journal of Psychiatry found that more than 80% of diaspora communities, people watching conflicts in their homelands from thousands of miles away, reported symptoms of PTSD, not from being there, from witnessing it. And it's not just war. Climate anxiety is now clinically recognized. 60% of young people report that fear of climate change negatively affects their daily functioning. Economic precarity, political instability, social isolation, one battle after another. That's not just a movie title. That's 2026. And here's what makes this different from past crises. There's no resolution. The pandemic didn't end and give us time to recover. It blended into economic crisis, which blended into climate disasters, which blended into political violence. Our nervous systems are designed to handle acute threats, fight or flight, but we're not in acute threat anymore. We're in chronic threat, and chronic threat does something different to the brain. It doesn't make you panic. It makes you numb. So when I ask, why are we watching apocalypse movies? Why are we watching films about things that are exhausting us? Why seek out more collapse when collapse is everywhere? And the answer is surprising. This isn't new. Humans have always turned to stories during collective trauma. And some of the greatest films ever made were released during apocalyptic times. Let me show you what I mean. Casablanca was released in 1942, World War II. The actual apocalypse was happening. Cities were being bombed, millions were dying, and people went to theaters to watch a movie about World War II. But here's what's important. Casablanca isn't about winning the war. It's about one man, Rick, choosing to act when doing nothing would be safer. Rick says,
I'd stick my neck out for nobody.
He's cynical, exhausted, done with the fight. Sound familiar? But by the end, he makes a choice. Not because he'll win the war, but because doing nothing would mean losing himself. That film gave audiences living through the apocalypse something crucial. Not a promise that they'd win, but a model for how to stay human while fighting. That's not escapism, that's survival. The Grapes of Wrath, 1940. The Great Depression, economic collapse, Dust Bowl, families displaced, another apocalypse. Ma Jode says,
We're the people that live.
not we're the people who win, not we're the people who fix everything. We are the people that live. That line is everything. Because sometimes survival itself is the victory. Tom Joad says, I'll be there. Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. He doesn't say I'll fix hunger. He says I'll be there. Presence, endurance, showing up. That's what the film offered during the Depression. And that's what people needed. Not solutions, validation that enduring was enough. Children of Men, 2006. Not an apocalypse happening in real time, but anticipatory apocalypse. The fear that the future itself is ending. In the film, humanity is infertile. No children have been born in 18 years. Civilization is collapsing because there's no future to fight for. That film came out in 2006, before the 2008 economic collapse, before the pandemic, before climate anxiety became mainstream. But people felt it coming. And now in 2026, young people are choosing not to have children because of climate change, because of economic instability, because the future feels too broken. Children of Men doesn't promise that apocalypse will be prevented. The film ends ambiguously. But it shows one thing clearly. Even when there's no future, protecting hope matters. 3 films, 3 apocalypses. Casablanca, moral action and chaos. Grapes of Wrath, survival as resistance. Children of Men, protecting hope without guarantee. None of them promised happy endings. They promised something more valuable, models for endurance. So we have established that people watch apocalyptic movies during apocalyptic times. But that still doesn't answer the question, why? If watching war footage traumatizes us, why doesn't watching war movies do the same thing? If climate anxiety is crippling, why doesn't watching Pandora burn make it worse? The answer is in the psychology. And it's fascinating. When you watch the news, your brain experiences what researchers call vicarious trauma. You witness suffering, but there's no resolution, no narrative arc, no ending, just more suffering tomorrow. Psychologist Dr. Charles Figley, who pioneered research on vicarious trauma, found that prolonged exposure to others' suffering without resolution creates what he calls compassion fatigue. You don't become numb because you don't care. You become numb because caring with no outlet is unbearable. But fictional stories work differently. When you watch a film, your brain still activates the same regions involved in processing real trauma, the amygdala, the anterior cingulate cortex. You genuinely feel the suffering. But here's the difference. Fiction provides narrative resolution. Even if the ending is tragic, there is an ending. The arc completes. Your brain gets closure. And that closure, even fictional closure, helps process real trauma that has no closure. There's also something called vicarious resilience, the opposite of vicarious trauma. Witnessing someone endure and survive builds psychological immunity. When you watch Jake Sully's family flee again and again but stay together, when you watch Bob Ferguson forced back into fighting but not giving up, when you watch The Creature rejected again and again but still seeking love, your brain learns endurance is possible. It's not inspiration porn. It's psychological rehearsal. Dr. Ruth Pat Horenczyk's research on collective resilience found that communities who share narratives of survival, even fictional narratives, report lower rates of PTSD symptoms because shared stories create what she calls narrative scaffolding, a framework for understanding this is survivable. So when we watch apocalypse movies during the apocalypse, we're not seeking more trauma. We're seeking resolution our real lives can't provide. We're practicing resilience. We're finding language for suffering that feels unspeakable. Fiction does what reality can't. It gives trauma a shape, a beginning, a middle, an end. And that shape helps us survive the shapeless trauma of real life. Which brings us to 2025. 3 films released within months of each other, all apocalyptic, all resonating deeply with audiences. Let's talk about why. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, 98 million views on Netflix and counting. Del Toro said Mary Shelley's novel was his Bible. He's wanted to make this film his entire life. Why? Listen to what Del Toro said. I never quite understood the saints. Then when I saw Boris Karloff on the screen, I understood what a saint or a messiah looked like. The creature as a saint, someone who suffers for others, who bears the burden of humanity's sins, who was rejected by the very people he could save. In Del Toro's film, the creature says, I have such love in me, more than you can imagine, but if I cannot provoke it, I will provoke fear. That line is 2026. People experiencing collective trauma. Climate activists, refugees, whistleblowers, anyone demanding justice. They're not asking to destroy. They're asking to be seen, heard, loved. But when systems refuse that basic humanity, when society rejects those who suffer, fear becomes the only language left. Victor Frankenstein creates life, then immediately rejects it as unintelligent and worthless. That's not just horror, that's intergenerational trauma. Previous generations built systems that are destroying us. Fossil fuel economy, endless wars, exploitative capitalism. And now, when we, the inheritors, say, you broke this, help us fix it, we're told we're entitled, overreacting, monstrous for demanding better. Victor Frankenstein is every politician who created climate policy that doomed us, then retired to a beach house. The creature is every young person left to fix what they didn't break. And the moral injury goes both ways. Victor can't undo what he's done. The creature can't unexist. That's the apocalypse Del Toro is showing us. Not destruction, abandonment. Del Toro said, we are the monsters, meaning humanity, systems, creators who abandon their creations. The film resonates because it names what we're living. The horror isn't the traumatized, it's the structures that traumatize. Then reject those they've harmed. One battle after another. Paul Thomas Anderson, Leonardo DiCaprio as Bob Ferguson, an ex-revolutionary who thought he was done fighting. But the fight isn't done with him. There's a scene where Bob is screaming into a payphone during a life or death emergency because he can't remember his password. That scene is absurd. And it's perfect because that is the modern apocalypse. Systems so broken that you can't even access help during crisis. Bureaucracy so Byzantine that survival requires remembering 47 passwords. The apocalypse isn't dramatic. It's being on hold with customer service while everything burns. The film is about an out-of-control American military machine, destroying anyone who resists. Sound familiar? Critics called it controversial because it names what we're watching in real time. But here's what matters. Bob is exhausted. He doesn't want to fight. The film even asks explicitly, aren't you tired of fighting? And the answer is yes. Everyone is tired. But the film shows what happens when tired people keep showing up anyway. Not because they'll win every battle, but because stopping means surrender. What keeps him going isn't ideology. It's love. His daughter, his people. The film is called One Battle After Another, not the final battle. Not the battle that we won, one after another. That's the truth it offers. The battles won't end, but neither will the people who fight them. Avatar, Fire and Ash, just crossed $1 billion. This is the third film where Jake Sully's family is under attack. Third film of fleeing, third film of fighting. The Ash people aren't just a cool new tribe. They're what happens when your environment is destroyed and you have to adapt or die. Every climate scientist, every indigenous community watching ancestral lands burn, every young person mourning a future they'll never have. They're all Ash people now. James Cameron said, Fire and Ash has greater emotional maturity than the previous films, and critics noticed. Audience responded to the quieter emotional stuff. Why? Because after years of pandemic, war, climate disasters, we don't need bigger explosions. We need acknowledgement. We need someone to say, yes, you're tired. This is hard. It's okay to feel that. The film doesn't promise the Sullys will ever get to rest. At some point, you have to ask, will they ever stop running? And the answer is probably not. Not while the world is like this. So the question becomes, how do we maintain our humanity when rest isn't an option? And that's what the film explores. Not victory, endurance. So, we've talked about classic films that helped previous generations endure their apocalypses. We've talked about the psychology, why fiction heals differently than reality. We've looked at 3 contemporary films and grappling with collapse. But I wanted to end by talking about what this means for you right now. If you feel exhausted, if it feels like one battle after another without end, if you're tired of fighting, tired of caring, tired of hoping, these films are telling you something important. You're not alone. And endurance is enough. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to win every battle. You don't even have to feel hopeful all the time. Sometimes survival itself is the victory. Jode, we are the people that live. Rick, choosing action over cynicism. Theo, protecting hope without guarantee. The creature, seeking love despite rejection. Bob Ferguson, fighting when exhausted. The Sully family, staying together through displacement. None of them won completely. All of them endured. That's what these films give us. Not false hope, not toxic positivity. Permission to be tired and keep going anyway. They show us that bearing witness matters, that choosing love over fear matters, that showing up, even when you don't have solutions, matters. They give us language for grief that feels unspeakable. They give us models for endurance when endurance feels impossible. They remind us that we're not the first people to live through apocalypse, and we won't be the last. When you watch apocalypse movies during the apocalypse, you're not escaping reality. You're practicing survival. You're rehearsing resilience. You're finding your people in the dark. And that's not entertainment. That is medicine. Thank you for watching The Silver Frame. If this episode made you think differently about the films you're watching, or if it helped you understand your own exhaustion a little better, leave a comment and tell me about it. I read every single one. And if there's a film that helped you endure your own apocalypse, share it. Because we're all looking for models of survival. Next episode, we're exploring
nostalgia.
Until then, keep watching, keep enduring, and remember, stories expose the human mind, and you're definitely not alone.